Hey, comic book fans. When it comes to the comic book genre, the thing that we kind of talk about the most is either the movies, the TV show, or lately the video games, because Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League is getting all kinds of people hot and bothered. Something we don't talk about nearly enough is the comic books themselves. Without them, there really is no comic book movies or TV shows or video games. So let's kind of put the attention back on them this week. This week, I'm going to give you my top 7 all-time favorite comic books. But before we get into the list, what are your favorite comic books of all time? Let me know down in the comments below. I always like hearing your recommendations. I'm always curious to see new stories. Without further ado, at number 7, we have Flashpoint by Geoff Johns. Now, this one is kind of more commonplace nowadays because the Flash movie, you know, the big financial success at the box office that the Flash movie was. Wah, wah. We are more familiar as an audience with the concept of time travel and multiverses. So Flashpoint is essentially the Flash goes back in time to make sure that his mother doesn't die. It's exactly what they used for the plot of the Flash movie, except this is a lot better and there was, you know, proper build up to it. So Barry basically goes back in time to save his mother, and by doing so will also save his dad, who got the short end of the stick and kind of got blamed for the death of his mom, even though it wasn't his fault. So in doing that, Barry accidentally kind of creates a butterfly effect and creates this whole dystopian future, in which case Batman is completely different and that Bruce Wayne dies and Thomas Wayne's the actual Batman this time around, and he uses guns and has no problem killing people. It's a cool different approach to a superhero story of just these are the kind of the characters that you know and love, but done in a drastically different way, except for the Flash. That's still the Flash you know and love, and it's so epic in scale but still personal in its both consequences and its story of it's very much a Barry story, even though the world and worlds around him are crumbling, and he's got to make the right choice at the end of, do I make the sacrifice to reset everything back to the way it was? The only downside is I don't know if it's one of those for new readers type of books. I don't know if it's one of those pick up and read type of things. At number 6, we have one of the most famous Batman stories of all time, Batman the Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. This is one of those of like, oh, a Hollywood director is tackling a Batman movie. The first comic he's probably gonna read is Batman the Long Halloween. Christopher Nolan has been very open and on the record of like, oh yeah, I read Batman Year One and Batman the Long Halloween when doing research for Batman Begins, and there's a lot of that in Batman Begins and definitely in The Dark Knight as well. That being said, Nolan could have picked a lot worse source material. These are some of those two in particular, some of the best Batman stories of all time, but I give the edge slightly to Batman the Long Halloween, and an honorable mention to the sequel, Batman Dark Victory, just because it introduces Robin to the universe, and that's always a win in my book, as you are well aware by now. So basically, Batman the Long Halloween is our famous Caped Crusader trying to track down the Holiday Killer, a killer that only kills people on holidays. Wow, what a clever and inventive name!
Do I detect a note of sarcasm?
Are you kidding me? This baby is off the charts.
The thing that makes Long Halloween stand out, one, is the beautiful and truly unique art style. This has such an atmosphere. Atmosphere sometimes is hard to capture in a comic book medium, but this has a very specific atmosphere and tone. You pick up a single page of this book and go, oh, this is from the Long Halloween. It is so different and unique visually from anything else Batman wise, and basically since. The only other Batman story that I can think that is so visually unique is probably Batman Arkham Asylum. That also is just out there and visually unique. But I love the story for Long Halloween. Every time you feel like Batman has the leg up and just kind of figuring out what the mystery is, there's another interesting twist and turn to the narrative. So you never fully get the whole picture until right at the end, just like a great mystery. And if there's anything I like just as much as comics, it's a good mystery. That is exactly what the Long Halloween is. At number 5, we have one of the best Superman stories of all time, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison, also known as the picture that you keep seeing whenever James Gunn posts anything about Superman Legacy. All-Star Superman is special just because it shows all the various different assets to Superman and what makes him such a beloved character. It's essentially a love letter to the character itself. So without giving too much away, the basic premise for All-Star Superman is, via some shenanigans on Earth, Superman only has more or less a year left to live. So what does the all-powerful being that is Superman do with only a year left? What affairs does he have in order? What do the people around, how does he interact with the people around him? What affairs does he need to do to make sure the world is still safe? It is a very touching and emotional story, much more than I was expecting the first time I read All-Star Superman. It's also been converted into a brilliant animated movie adaptation. Really, really love that one as well. It's just a wonderful Superman story with one of, if not the best endings to a comic book of all time. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it is essentially Superman at his absolute best. At number 4, we have one that I'm not really sure has a name, but the cover of it just says Spider-Man Great Power. So I'm just gonna title it Spider-Man Great Power, I guess. Essentially what this is a collection of a lot of the early Spider-Man comics where he first meets Doc Ock, Kraven the Hunter, Electro, basically the formation of the Sinister Six. Now, I grew up reading a lot of Spider-Man comics, but given that I was born and raised in the 90s, I didn't really read a lot of the 90s comics because, if you didn't know, Spider-Man was going through a bit of a rough patch creatively in the 90s. You might even argue that he hasn't really recovered since then. So I read a lot of the original Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Spider-Mans, and I really could not get enough of them. I was very much the awkward reading kid in the class, so I really resonated with Peter Parker, especially that original dorky Peter Parker. I never rocked the full-on like glasses and sweater, but I could see a lot of myself in the character, and that's the beauty of Spider-Man. We all are supposed to see a little bit of ourselves in Spider-Man. Are these comics dated? Oh, definitely. Some of the dialogue and some of the artwork is very of its time, but I still am incredibly nostalgic for those stories and just how it's very straightforward. There's not as much nuance as there is in the newer comics of stuff, whether it's Marvel or DC, but that's okay. Sometimes I just like a good, straightforward good guy versus bad guy fight. At number 3, we have my all-time favorite Batman story in Batman Under the Red Hood by Judd Winnick. I love this story, but also it might be one of those of like you can't really dive into the deep end on this one if this is your first comic ever. There's a lot of backstory and lore that you kind of need to know going into this, but it's such a good story nonetheless. So essentially what this one is Batman encounters a new vigilante to Gotham known as Red Hood, who is doing essentially what Batman's doing, but doing it much more brutally, violently, and killing certain people. And when it's revealed who Red Hood is, it's basically a spit in the face to Batman. The past comes back to haunt him in the best way possible, but it's not just Red Hood as a character, how everyone else in the entire Batman roster is utilized. Nightwing is here, and it's great. You have Nightwing in a story, that's really all I need. But the rest of the narrative around it is so good. At first, it's this mystery of who's Red Hood. Then once you know who Red Hood is, the emotional ramifications for Batman. Then the finale, where it's kind of a triple threat match, but not really. Again, this comic's been out forever, but I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't read it because it's so good. There's another fantastic animated adaptation of this, just like there was for All-Star Superman. At number 2, we have my all-time favorite Superman story, Superman for All Seasons by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. Yes, the same guys that did Batman The Long Halloween and Batman Dark Victory, except it is completely opposite of those stories completely. Whereas Long Halloween and Dark Victory were very dark and moody and atmospheric, just like you'd expect from a Batman story, this is overtly bright. It is very bright, very colorful, very different art style from their previous work. This is almost like pastel paintings in comic book form. I love the visual style of Superman for All Seasons. It is unlike anything I've ever seen before in a comic or since. It's got such a unique style, but the story is interesting in and of itself. So where the For All Seasons parts come in is it's essentially Superman's first year on the job in Metropolis, and there's 4 different perspectives on how they view Superman, one representing each season. So say you've got Lex Luthor in the winter, Lois Lane in the summer, Martha Kent in another season, and so on and so forth. And it's so beautiful to see how these characters see and interact with Superman. Do they see him as Clark? Do they see him as the savior of Smallville do they see him as a threat to the legacy that is the Luthor name? It's such a fascinating and compelling look at the character of Superman. While not necessarily being an origin, there's enough Smallville in there that I like where they go with it. Another big draw for me with Superman for All Seasons was how they depict Superman. It's not so much like a John Byrne bodybuilder type. It's almost closer to like a Mr. Incredible build of he is a large, almost to a comical level large individual, but not in a muscular way, almost in just a large body figured version of Superman. That extends to when he's both Superman and Clark, but Clark, he's got this interesting big hulking body and slouching stature. It's a very interesting contrast and a very cool deliberate choice. Not to mention, Superman for All Seasons has easily my favorite Superman moment of all time, one that's been replicated in Superman and Lois, in which case he saves a kid from falling off a building, gives him back the hat, kid goes, "Oh, cool costume," to which Superman goes, "Thanks, my mom made it for me."
There you go, friend.
Thanks. Cool costume.
Thanks. My mom made it for me.
It is the most quintessential Superman scene of all time, and no joke, I will cry tears of joy if that is in Superman Legacy or in any of James Gunn's upcoming Superman movies. I need that to happen. But it should come as no shock to anybody. If you've been with this channel for any length of time, you should kind of figure what my number one will be. My number one, Nightwing Year One by Chuck Dixon. I love this so much, not just because it's Nightwing.
Are you sure about that?
I don't think just because it's Nightwing. Nightwing Year One, I'll be perfectly honest, did play a big contributing factor for pitching a Nightwing movie part one. That first video that I did, I took not all of it, but certain elements from this storyline for my story pitch of how I want a Nightwing movie to work. Just because I think there's a lot of the backbone and the core of who the character of Nightwing is introduced in Nightwing Year One. The visual style is very unique and different. It very much pops off the page. It's not flat. Everything is very vibrant and larger than life, almost to a cartoon degree. I love how he interacts with Superman. Don't always love how he interacts with Batman in this one, but that's another thing that might be played into in a Nightwing adjacent video. I swear it's coming this year. I swear. I'm working on a script. Nightwing 3 is happening this year. I promise. But Nightwing Year One really is just the template for a great Year One story. I almost put Robin Year One on here, also written by Chuck Dixon, which details Dick Grayson's first year as Robin, but this is his first appearance as Nightwing, and it's so cool to see the ground being laid for my favorite character. The artwork really pops. It's a pretty straightforward story, but one that still really gets the job done. And Chuck Dixon to me is still the best Nightwing writer, and it's not even close. Well, what do you guys think? What are your all-time favorite comics? Is there any big name titles that you think I missed? Whatever your thoughts, let me know it down in the comments below. And as always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, stay sharp, comic book fans.